Hello everyone, this is Bob and Threadbare, and welcome back to Weaving Worlds. So there's one storytelling element that comes up a lot in speculative fiction works, particularly, but not limited to, fantasy works. That element is the prophecy, a promise or a warning of things yet to come. Prophecies go back all the way to the beginning of human history. Ever since we started worrying about the future, we started wondering about how we could figure out what happens ahead of time. And since with fiction, you're the one creating that future, then why not also create a prophecy that's 100% accurate? Well, there are a couple of reasons not to. The first being that if you tell your audience how the story is going to end, then you've pretty much ruined any chance you had at building suspense. But there are other ways you can use a prophecy that don't just summarize the story, and if you're clever, you can use them to make your audience expect one thing and then switch to something else to surprise them. Or you could change the way prophecies work so that they aren't as inevitable as they seem. There's really a number of ways you can go. The inevitable prophecy. This is basically the baseline concept of a literary prophecy. Someone foretells an event or series of events, and one by one, they all come to pass. It doesn't matter how hard the protagonist or the antagonist fights against it, the future is inevitable. This is the kind of prophecy I'm warning creators against using. While this will help you establish your gods or certain characters within the setting as powerful, you'll ruin the suspense of your story in the process. Now, I for one don't think that spoiling a good story and ruining a good story are one and the same, but even so, you'll be robbing your audience of that first-time experience. However, there are still ways of using a clear and inevitable prophecy in your story without removing all the suspense. For one thing, you could have your prophecy be fulfilled during the middle of your story, and everything that happens after that is uncharted waters. Another option is to have the prophecy be incomplete. Maybe part of it was lost to history, and the protagonists have to look for the missing piece. Or maybe the prophecy only describes one aspect of the events, and not the whole picture. The broken prophecy. This is the primary alternative to the inevitable prophecy. The prophecy of your story seems to be inevitable, seems like it describes every future event to the last detail, but then a sufficiently climactic moment comes along, and what should happen doesn't. A prophecy of doom is averted, or a prophecy of success is denied. The broken prophecy is a great option for when you want your story to say that the future is unknown, fate can be changed, destiny is what you make of it, every choice matters, or something else along those lines. At the same time, it shows you that the gods are fallible, or at least whichever gods were responsible for the prophecy are fallible. You might even have dueling prophecies set down by opposing individuals, and each one has a different ending which cannot coexist with one another. Breaking a prophecy can be a great way to subvert your audience's expectations, but you have to be careful about how you use prophecies in your setting for future stories, since you have now proven that they can't be trusted. The self-fulfilling prophecy. The self-fulfilling prophecy is perhaps best exemplified by the myth of Perseus. Perseus' grandfather, Acrisius, was told by the Oracle of Delphi that his daughter's son would one day kill him. So he locked his daughter up, but that caused Zeus to manifest to her as a shower of gold and give her a demigod son, Perseus. So Acrisius cast his daughter and grandson into the sea, they washed ashore on an island, and after growing up, Perseus would accidentally kill Acrisius when his poorly thrown discus cracked the old king in the skull. Or at least that's how it goes in one version. The point of a self-fulfilling prophecy is that the subject of the prophecy is the one who unintentionally causes it to come about because of how they react when they hear it. If it's a bad prophecy, then the subject does something sinful or villainous to avoid it, but that sinful action is what starts the prophecy's wheels in motion. If it's a good prophecy, then the subject takes a risk or makes a change that allows the prophecy to come to pass. In either case, a self-fulfilling prophecy offers you the best of both worlds. First, it lets you portray the gods, fate, destiny, or whatever you want to call it as infallible, And second, it teaches the lesson that good actions lead to good results, while bad actions lead to bad results. The downside is that the self-fulfilling prophecy is very overused, and while the journey may be surprising, the ending is completely spelled out. The vague prophecy. Vague prophecies are another nice compromise option. They can be interpreted in multiple ways, and while the wording may seem to favor the antagonists at first, it eventually becomes clear that it supports the protagonists and their actions. For a classic example, we can look at The Lord of the Rings, in which the leader of the Nazgul knows that not by the hand of man will he fall. He thought this meant that he would never fall in battle, but what it actually meant was that he would be killed by a woman and a hobbit. That's the sort of ambiguity you're looking for when you create a vague prophecy. The text of the foretelling sounds like it says one thing, but hidden in technicalities and turns of phrase is the actual truth. This wiggle room is what makes vague prophecies a good choice. You get to have the certainty of an inevitable prophecy, but you also get to keep your audience in the dark throughout the whole story, and surprise them with which interpretation turns out to be the real one. On the other hand, this vagueness makes the prophecy all but worthless for actually predicting the future, and it calls into question just how useful or helpful the individual who created it actually is. Prophecy as a guideline. This is the style of prophecy that I personally prefer. Prophecies of this nature don't tell you the future exactly, so much as they set out a list of things you need to do to get a desired result. You could also think of this as a prophecy as a recipe. To get your desired result, you will need to gather ingredients A, B, and C, and then combine them through process D. The reason I prefer this approach is because it gives the protagonist or antagonist a specific goal without promising them that the process will be easy or inevitable. It also implies that the prophecy creator is powerful not because they can see the future, but because they can see what it will take to perform an impressive deed. However, you should avoid combining guideline prophecies with vague prophecies, since if a prophecy is both instructional and non-specific, it won't be very helpful. Of course, there are some downsides as well. A guideline prophecy doesn't say anything about the nature of fate or the future, and it's much less impressive than a prophecy that's guaranteed to come to pass. Also, the audience will probably guess that the prophecy describes the future of the story even if you swear up and down that it isn't inevitable. It's like Chekhov's gun. You don't put a prophecy in your story unless you plan on fulfilling it. As such, you should avoid being too specific with what it says. Prophecy and long-form stories. What I mean by long-form stories here is several books in a series, several seasons of a serial show, several movies in a franchise, and other things like that. I mean stories that go back to the same setting time after time, and which therefore have the opportunity to foreshadow events months or years ahead of time. Prophecies can be an excellent vehicle for doing so, but the problem you face is that you are committing yourself to traveling down a very specific path in the future, a path that you may end up ignoring, forgetting about, or regretting, because you later decide you'd rather go somewhere else. Basically, when you create a prophecy or otherwise foreshadow to an event that you don't plan to get to during the current story, you are making a promise to your audience. And when you finally get to the promised event, you might not want to be constrained by that earlier promise, for one reason or another. Even famous authors have trapped themselves into corners by setting up an ending and a beginning at the same time and then struggling when the middle parts ended up wandering in a new direction. And whereas you can easily change a story goal when you're the only one who knows what it is, you're gonna have a much harder time resolving things if you hinted at that goal to your audience. Prophecy and collaborative storytelling. Because prophecies are so prevalent in fantasy fiction, it can be tempting to use one when you're the game master of a tabletop role-playing game. But the problem with doing so is that the game master isn't the only storyteller at the table. All of the players have input on the plot through the actions they take, both in and out of character. And so any prophecy you create could end up being thwarted, irrelevant, or obsolete long before you intended it to come to pass. A villain could end up dying early, a player whose character is the center of a prophecy could leave the table, or the players could decide the prophecy's storyline doesn't interest them and so they avoid it entirely. That's another reason I like the prophecy as a guideline option. The format sets forth goals for the players to achieve, but it doesn't promise them anything, and that means you don't have to force anything if their efforts go badly or if they give up halfway through. So while I present it here as one of several options for various other storytelling formats, I strongly recommend you use guideline prophecies for collaborative storytelling because anything else will be promising more than you can deliver. Thanks for joining me again for today's journey into Weaving Worlds. Please like, share, and subscribe because that raises my visibility here on YouTube. Check out my other stuff if you have some time, support me on Patreon if you have some money, and I hope I'll see you again for the next video.